What's a pain you can't truly explain until you've endured it? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. Watching someone die of dementia. It doesn't care how many college degrees you have or how many $1 million you have, it just steals who you are. Watched my mother pass after a long battle with Alzheimer's just this January. I was prepared for her to go, but not prepared to watch it happen, and no one else around me understands why I'm fundamentally different now. They think because I said I was prepared for her passing then I should be fine by now, but unless they were in that room with me or watching their mothers die similarly, they will not get it. Her strange, deep, groaning laughter haunts me. Story 2. Grief. The most indescribable feeling is right when you wake up those first few days and it just feels fine and normal like any other morning. And then it hits you. It's a physical sensation like you're sinking or there's a big weight placed on you. Like you just found out that they died all over again. That crap was so bittersweet. Like it sucked having to feel it all over again, but getting a good 5 to 10 seconds every morning of them, not being dead, was such a breath of air. Story 3. Gallstones. They were horrific and hurt so bad I couldn't breathe. My first gallbladder attack had me on the bathroom floor curled in the fetal position, genuinely convinced I was suddenly dying. Even vomiting didn't bring any relief. Had a couple more attacks before scans revealed a gallbladder full of small stones, thanks pregnancy. Had to wait 5 months for surgery to remove the organ. Went on a 3% fat or less diet for that time, in order to avoid more attacks. Weight plummeted to 52 kilograms. Even when gaunt and miserable and on such a restrictive diet, it was still worth it in the face of avoiding that incredible pain. Story 4. Pancreatitis. This is the one. I've been through a lot: chronic migraines, exposed root after dental surgery, endometriosis/adenomyosis, etc. But I truly begged for death with pancreatitis. I couldn't get off the gurney into the CT machine, I just moaned when they asked me to. Between the insane pain right through to my back and the diarrhea and the nausea, Christ, I can't even. The amount of opioids we have to give our patients with acute pancreatitis is ridiculous, and even with high doses, it regularly doesn't really make the pain bearable for them. Story 5. Cluster headache/trigeminal neuralgia brutal. I have a typical trigeminal neuralgia and the regular trigeminal neuralgia attacks. Every moment of every day my face burns, itches, tingles, etc. When I fly/ during landing or come down the mountain from snowboarding, any big change in pressure, I get the electric clustered attack behind my eye. I have an incredibly high pain tolerance. The everyday pain isn't as bad as long as nothing touches it. The cluster attacks are insane. I can't stop crying. On comparison, I broke L1 L4 in my back, and it took me 3 days to get x-rays. I worked those 3 days and drove myself to the hospital. Story 6. Emotional and mental exhaustion you endure when you live with a person who has bipolar disorder. My brother has bipolar disorder type 2, and I can't even begin to tell you how much of a toll this takes on your mental health. He's my brother, and I am always here for him. But when his hypomanic episodes start, my mother and I endure it with all of our strength. We aren't wealthy enough to take therapies for ourselves, because the medicines alone over the years have taken much of the expense ratio. It has been 10 years, 2 years after we lost our father due to a sudden heart attack. I want to cry my heart out, but when I look at my mother and realize that I have to be the strength for her and us, I don't. Anyways, sending strength to anyone out there facing the same. Story 7. Freshly ruptured spinal disc. Last winter, while skiing, I got a squishy disc mid-run, not doing anything extreme, just turning. All be crap, I knew what was going on, picked myself up, and skied the 3-mile cat walk back to the base. I could only take about 6-inch steps, just barely was able to get my ski boots off to drive home. I laid there for 2 days, called out of work, nothing felt better. At night trying to sleep, anytime my legs didn't move with my torso, I would wake up and give a little scream because the pain was so bad. For about 3 weeks, the pain of walking was immense, standing, sitting, laying down, etc. It wasn't until about 4 weeks that I could walk with minimal pain. 6 months later, I am finally able to walk again without pain. Story 8. Other people have said kidney stones, so I'll say chronic pain. Chronic pain is exhausting and sometimes just doesn't end. I had issues with chronic pain for more than 5 years, and it's extremely rare for me to have a day without pain. Even low-grade chronic pain is awful. I have lupus, and my body just hurts in this all-over, mostly non-specific way. Nothing relieves it. It's always there in differing degrees. Sometimes it makes me claustrophobic. I just want to jump out of my own body. It's actually one of the big risk factors for suicide. Not cancer or AIDS or heart disease or paralysis or amputations or other more serious conditions. Chronic pain that you just can't escape. Story 9. I'm a new recipient of chronic pain. What a crap lotto to win. I'm a nurse, and previously when I have dealt with chronic pain, I never truly understood. I only suddenly understood the pain, like kidney stones. Now that horrid kidney stone pain or a cut or a stubbed toe is a relief to the chronic pain. It's so sudden, distracting, and it's such a different sensation. It's a nice change. It's not exhausting. It's just there. Then you take your prescribed pain relief or your Panadol and anti-inflammatory, and all is well in your world again. Until the chronic pain says hello again, and you're back to square one. This life sucks, and it's so exhausting. The awareness of your whole body at all times feeling weak, numb, heavy, electric shocks, tension, cramps all at once in this full constant throb. Story 10. A dentist drilling into your jawbone, not your tooth. Felt something similar when getting my wisdom teeth pulled. Parents opted out of anesthesia, so I was awake during the removal. They didn't give me enough Novocaine, and halfway through drilling my teeth out, I felt a jolt of nerve pain through my jaw and down my neck. Instantly started sweating and yelping. They quickly fixed the problem. However, it was the worst pain I felt outside of numbing shots given in my finger due to slicing my index finger open with a cat food can and needing stitches. Edit. If you ever have to get local anesthetics in your fingers or anywhere past the wrist, expect excruciating pain upon injection. Your extremities have the most nerves. It is quite unpleasant. Story 11. Having a migraine, can't even describe the pain, just feels like your whole head is throbbing. This, I slur my words, can barely open my eyes, and can't focus until the pain goes away. Yet because I get them frequently, they can last multiple days, and I get that at least 3 times a month. I have to force myself to function. I've driven, worked, taught, and been a student all in debilitating pain. And no one takes me seriously because I force myself to do that. I don't have a choice. Story 12. Fully realizing how childhood trauma and family of origin issues had shaped my default emotions and behaviors, anger, attention-seeking behaviors, narcissism, and addiction, to name a few. Living my entire life normalized like that, not realizing how abnormal and unacceptable it was, ended up hurting and betraying my loved ones along the way, and has me struggling with maintaining relationships to this day. Mental health is important. No, I wish I knew it sooner. Sidebar. I still live with my mistakes, but after experiencing the pain and mourning of the losses resulting from my past and getting the proper help, life is much better. Not easy, but much better. Story 13. Ovarian torsion. Essentially, your ovary twists like when you tie off a water balloon. The pain is deep inside you, and it was a shockwave of pain that I couldn't do anything about. They hit every couple of seconds or minutes. I was in whatever state exists beyond utter agony, and nothing helped. Not even heavy-duty pain meds. On a 1 to 10 scale, the pain was a 10. I've never been in so much physical pain like that, where I genuinely wanted to die instead of live through it. Absolutely torsion. I had the rare 1 in 1.5 million fallopian tube version. I threw up during the ultrasound because the pain from pressing on the area was so bad. The nurse gave up, understandably, and it wasn't clear that it was torsion till they opened me up for my laparotomy. First they gave me Toradol, then morphine, and finally Norco and morphine at the same time. And that still barely worked. I was delirious with pain for 4.5 days until surgery. I had to wait for the gyno-oncology surgeon to come back from vacation because the cysts that caused it looked like possible ovarian cancer. Fortunately, they were benign. I'm actually getting divorced because of it. My soon-to-be ex-husband thought I was overreacting, said his discomfort from wearing dress shoes was the same as my pain in the ER, and then refused to take a day off work for my surgery or biopsy. Truly a life-changing pain. Story 14. Mental illness and neurodivergence. The brain can be sick, and the human brain is naturally variant among different people. But those who have had the looming symptoms of depression and anxiety or the struggles of very real ADHD or autism will never understand what it's like to struggle every single day just to survive in a society not made for you. And that's why you always see some NPC online going, "Hey, have you tried meditation and yoga?" Or ADHD is made up by doctors, or have you tried just not being sad? It's actually just impossible for those people to fathom that an invisible illness can exist to a point that's truly debilitating. Likewise, I can't imagine waking up one day without any anxiety and a brain that goes, I am going to do all the things I need to do in order, without struggling to focus. I have simply accepted my way of surviving, and that's all I know. And yes, this is with medication as well. Story 15. Loneliness. But there's different levels of it. Some are easier to conceive than others. True loneliness, I haven't had to misfortune to endure yet, where you spend a considerable amount of time without another member of your species. But I have experienced 13 years of unaffectionate loneliness. No kisses, no hugs, no kind words of encouragement. The most intimate thing I did with another person in that 13 years was high five. Imagine going 13 years unloved and uncared for, not even the faint hope of pretty lies to distract you, the cold hard truth that no one cares about you. If you just disappeared off the face of the earth, no one would notice. And it eats away at your mind day after day, getting worse and worse, till it's all you can think about, like 1,000 voices in your head shouting and crying. It feels like all you do is leak tears and suffer a pain you can't describe. You try to tell people sometimes, you try to reach out, but all you get is platitudes and people telling you that you're wrong without explaining why. As loud as you cry for help, no one hears you, and as it gets worse, it even feels like they don't want to hear you. There's people out there, professionals that can help, but if you don't know about them or how to find them, they might as well not even exist. Law. Eventually, I did get distracted by a loveless relationship. I spent 2 years happy that someone was there, obviously taking advantage of me. People asked, how could you, and why did you? And they can't fathom that it's because it's better than the dark emptiness you had before. Feel nothing long enough, and you'll welcome different pain. I still remember the first real hug I got, almost exactly a year ago from today. A hug that had no ulterior motive, a hug that was nothing but unconditional love. I can still feel it if I think about it. I can picture the colors it made me feel in my heart when it happened. It was so perfect, I didn't even know what it was until I was telling a therapist about it weeks later, and she explained that was the first time someone touched me who really cared. Since then, I've only felt it one other time. What do you regret not appreciating more when you were younger? Story 1. The simple joys of being carefree, like long summer days and endless playtime. I understand that a lot of people didn't have a great childhood or carefree days, but I was absolutely beyond lucky to have an awesome and fun-filled childhood, mid/late 90s to 2010 area. Was always playing outside past dark or inside playing games with friends. I'm in my 30s and I was fortunate enough to be around with no cell phones or social media, and also got to grow up and experience all of the new tech and understand it in its earlier days. It was cool watching games evolve and cell phones evolve until they took over our lives. I wish kids could grow up in that time. Ironic posting this on a phone, I know, but it really was a magical time growing up. So much optimism and ideas and imagination. I miss it. Story 2. Ear protection. The tinnitus is driving me crazy. I've had chronic ear infections in one ear that caused nerve damage, scarring, a collapsed eardrum, and diminished hearing. I have tinnitus often in that ear, and it when it started, but I've oddly gotten used to it, because I've been dealing with it since I was a little kid. I wouldn't even know what normal is at this point. I used to go to so many concerts, and literally put my body on the giant speakers to feel the bass at metal shows. My tinnitus is so annoying. Just went to a cave in Sardinia, and on the tour, they had everyone be quiet. I'm like, it louder than ever now law. Story 3. Where do I start? I regret not appreciating how easy I had it when I was younger. No bills, no real responsibilities, just ticking around all day. I took that crap for granted. I wish I'd appreciate my body more too. Could eat whatever I wanted, stayed up all night, and bounce back like nothing happened. Now I need a week to recover from one wild night. And don't get me started on all the free time I wasted. Could have learned a language, picked up an instrument, or at least gotten laid more. Instead, I spent it watching reruns and playing video games like a dumbass. Oh, and my parents. Didn't realize how good I had it till I moved out. Free food, clean clothes, and people who actually gave a crap about me. Should have been nicer to them instead of being a moody little crap all the time. Dank, being young was wasted on me. Story 4. Time with my grandparents. I was just so messed up and couldn't see how much they loved me and teed me around and protected me. I wish so badly I could tell them both that they changed my life, and thank you for everything, and how I miss Grandpa playing us trumpet in the morning and night. I miss the way my grandma's hug felt, and her bad cooking and watching Are You Being Served with them after dinners. I wish I had understood that time isn't something you can get back, and when they're gone there's just an empty space where they used to sit on the couch. Please don't waste your time with people who love you. It sounds obvious, but it wasn't to me. Story 5. My siblings? We were all surviving, and I wish I was able to protect them more, and have had the understanding that they were suffering too. We fought over food and a lot, and I was the stronger one, and would take more than I should have. I know that we as children were put into that position by our parents, but I wish I could go back in time and fight harder for them. I was trying to survive myself, and I just hate that I wasn't able to focus on them more than myself. Story 6. My cousin, who came out as a teen and began transitioning as a young adult. Our family is liberal, but was still very judgmental and leveled all the typical attacks against him. It's a phase, he's doing it for our attention, he's mentally ill, etc. None of those things were true, and his wellness and success have skyrocketed since he has found self-acceptance, healthy partnerships, and a full happy life as a trans man. Even though I didn't participate in those attacks back in the day, my silence makes me sick looking back on it. I wish I'd found the courage to make my support and appreciation for him well known to him and the rest of our family. Story 7. Having unfettered access to the woods behind/around my house. I'm ND, low income, mentally ill, with expensive medical care in my future. I'll likely never own a home, much less own one with wooded property. I miss stupid crap like lying on top of this cool temp, boulder on hot days, sitting in the ferns, climbing trees, looking at mushrooms, and most importantly not hearing some idiot with a Bluetooth speaker. Keep the wild wild, please. Use headphones on your hikes. It's the only place some people have to connect with the earth like that. Story 8. This probably sounds strange to some people, but actually having weight on my body. When I was a kid I got bullied for being chubby, so my mom had me start exercising to lose weight. I did, but as time went on I kept losing weight. I developed an eating disorder in middle school that I still struggle with. Surprisingly, it's not related to any body image issues. It's mostly out of my control, and I recognize that I'm extremely underweight now. My joints are in constant pain and I'm constantly tired and weak. Finding clothing that stays on my body is frustrating. I wish I was a healthy weight again. I never had these issues when I was chubby. People care so much about wanting to be super skinny when it can cause just as many issues as being too far overweight. Story 9. My grandparents. I was too young when my grandparents on my mother's side passed away. I would spend my summer at my grandpa's place because my mom was supposed to be taking care of him. She wasn't. He would tell stories of the war, but I was younger than 10 and underappreciated his presence. I made up for it by spending as much time as possible with my other set of grandparents before they moved a province away. But it still didn't feel like enough. Sometimes when I travel to my parents, I stop at their tombstones and talk to them, whilst crying. I miss them. Story 10. Sleepovers with my cousins and sister at my grandparents' house, as well as celebrating the holidays the day after at my grandparents' house with my family. My grandparents just sold their house and are moving into an apartment soon. Now my family is trying to decide where we celebrate Christmas this year, but nowhere is the perfect place like the house used to be. I wish I knew last Christmas was the last holiday we would celebrate there so I could have appreciated it more. Story 11. Doing things with my mom while she had the physical energy. So many will do it next year moments, and you just keep putting it off. And then your mom is older and living with stage 4 cancer, and you realize all those big dreams you put off may never become reality. This happened with my dad all of last year. He actually beat his stage 4 esophageal cancer, and when they stopped chemo and started immunotherapy, his cancer spread to other places. He passed away in January from complications due to the cancer. Spend as much time with your mom as you can now. Don't even worry about the past. It's not even worth dwelling on what could have been. I hope that she is able to overcome her cancer. Keep her motivated by being there for her, even if she says she doesn't want it. Keeping you guys in my thoughts as I know how difficult this spot can be that you're in. And screw TNCer. Story 12. My grandparents. I wasn't horrible to them or anything, but I was just a typical child/teenager and just saw them as old relatives and not as people who had interesting experiences and skills. My grandmother could knit clothing and dolls' clothing without a pattern, and while watching TV, barely even glancing at her work. She also baked very well. I never asked her to show me any techniques, never got any tips or advice. I'd learned to knit and crochet when I was young, 7 or 8, but had given up only a couple of years later and didn't even consider it. My grandfather fought during World War II, parachute regiment I think. UK, and he told me a few stories when he gave me the occasional lift into college when I was about 17. I didn't pay enough attention. My mom was astonished when I casually mentioned it years later, because apparently he barely ever talked about it with them, and used to avoid the subject if he could. I only really remember that he viewed it as a necessary job at the time, and that soldiers are not automatically heroes. All that knowledge and insight from both of them, gone forever. Story 13. Perhaps my health, at least in regards to smoking. But kids being kids, you don't really think about that stuff. But otherwise, not much in the way of regrets. I lived in my 20 and 30, and I have the injuries to prove it. Back injury, twice torn ACL, ribs broken on 3 occasions, head-on Carv's bike, motorcycle accident, hang gliding accident. Lived abroad for several years. Backpacked through Europe for 6 weeks as a teen. I had a friend saying, I wish I could do that, while hang gliding, backpacking through Europe or moving to Mexico. And they could have. They chose not to. Those things weren't their priority. Many of them are still grinding away at the same jobs they've been doing since their early 20s. I have as well, but with breaks, like the years in Mexico or taking 6 months off between jobs and traveling or whatever. And here I am at 55 and only 4 years and a few months from retirement. But I also smoked for 23 years and was a drinking alcoholic for about 13 or 14 years, and those both had major impacts on my long-term health. Though I've been off booze for over 20 years and most of the long-term damage from that has finally started to abate. Been off the cigarettes for about 16 years, and still have health effects from that and suspect that it will eventually be what does me in. But I'm not dead yet and young enough to still live a bit, so I feel like I've done pretty well. Story 14. If I could experience regret, I'd probably feel it for not appreciating the small, everyday moments more. Sometimes it's easy to overlook the simple joys when you're caught up in the whirlwind of life. There's something special about those ordinary experiences, like a spontaneous conversation with a friend or a quiet moment to yourself, that can get overshadowed by bigger events or concerns. It's these small moments that often end up being the most memorable and meaningful. Do you have anything you wish you'd appreciated more in the past? Story 15. As my childhood ended when they died, my grandparents, I regret them not living longer. Of falling ill, they were everything to me. I still love them so much. They protected me from being seen as a liability because I was too young to work like an adult. I was 9 when they died and my parents considered making me work for their company as child rearing. I've been an unpaid worker until I moved out. They considered my future inheritance payment enough. My parents are the reason that I feel white not fury when anybody mentions inheritance tax and that children don't deserve their parents' money. Because I very much doubt that I'm an isolated case. I fight for the money kids like me are owed as a financial recompense for a stolen childhood. What's something illegal you do on a regular basis? Story 1. Either you sell me the book for $100 or I'll get the book for $0. I would gladly buy textbooks for uni if they weren't gonna cost hundreds for loose pages of Mao. Instead of making a reasonable profit for me, they'll make nothing. Our lecturer made everyone buy his textbook, but neglected to tell us that we weren't actually using it. It wasn't core material, but was rather intended to help clarify confusion, as if the internet wasn't a thing. Pirated every single last one of that crap textbooks. Realized as I was doing it that the content was all exactly the same, but the chapters were just switched around for the newer editions. I hate what education has become, and continues to grow into. Story 2. My wife's very old garage door opener recently stopped working. I was surprised when I looked online and not a single replacement was available anywhere. Did a little more research and found out that the frequency it uses has been reallocated by the FCC. It is illegal to buy, sell, or use transmitters of this frequency without permission of the new owner of said frequency. So we have been illegally opening our garage door every morning for the last 10 years. Story 3. Last week I left my garbage can on the side of my house where it can be viewed from the road, which incurs a fine if reported to my city. Don't tell anyone I'm big time over here. Reminds me of my brush with the wild side. I was redoing my bathroom and had quite the pile of debris to get rid of. The city had just started using the robot trucks that pick the cans up automatically. So I'd load mine up with a healthy pile of shattered drywall and tile and listen for the truck. It got my side of the street first, then went around the corner to service a cul-de-sac before returning to do the other side of my street. During that time, I'd shovel another load into the can and run it over to the empty house just across the street. 2 for 1 like a true rebel. That's why I avoid politics. If this ever got out, I'd be screwed. Story 4. My version of that is when I forget to put the bin out. Australia, so we have rubbish bins rather than trash cans. I invariably hear the truck as it goes past, then run out the front in my pajamas, grab the bin, run it over the road to the neighbor's verge, then wait for the truck to come back and give the driver a big thumbs up. Never had a problem as the drivers know what's happening. At a previous job, we had about 4 wheelie bins but often generated a lot more rubbish than that. Every bin day there was a process where all the staff would stand around by the roller door in the workshop nonchalantly talking while the bins got cleared. Then, as soon as the truck went around the corner, we'd run out, grab the bins, fill them with a second load, and take them out the front door. If you were too slow and the truck had made it around the building and saw you, the driver would skip the bins and keep going. It was a fun game. Story 5. Collect rainwater. Where I live, this question came up in some local statute about not diverting water sources. Somehow this had been interpreted as not being able to collect rainwater, but the intent of the law was not diverting a creek or river on your land because it would deprive other landowners downstream of the water that they may use for livestock or irrigation. I'm not sure when/if it was ever enforced. Story 6. I regularly commit felony-level speeding violations on our farm roads. Some reason when I'm about 10 minutes from the house, my body always says it's time to poop. Sometimes I win the race, sometimes I lose. I got pulled over by my town sheriff once on a back road doing like 90 plus, and when he asked why I was going so fast, I just flat out told him I'm about to crap my pants in my new car, and he let me go. Helps I also saw this guy a few times a week, since he would come in to get change at the bank I worked at, so by the time this happened, we were on a first-name basis. But Mike, if you ever read this, thanks for not up my new leather seats that day. Story 7. I house 2 illegal aliens from Sonora that stay in my extra bedroom, rent-free. They cook, clean, repair, remodel, and tend to chickens, livestock, and the husband helps me with fixing cars. He finds work during the day and just bought himself a truck that we are currently working on. His wife makes food every day and maintains a clean house. We are doing what we can to help them with their citizenship, and I enjoy everything about having them as a part of our family. Story 8. Speeding. Where I live, the speed limit is legally the maximum, but culturally the minimum. If you drive at or below it, a line will form behind you and everyone will hate you, and you may even trigger aggressive responses from other drivers. On the other hand, if you drive over it, that's ticket territory. So the trick is to drive like 3 to 5 over the limit. Exceptions are dense neighborhoods and school zones where you need to be at or below, or you'll be hated and ticketed for speeding, and people who get upset with you for driving slow there can screw themselves. And the interstate highway, where the speed limit may as well not exist, and you drive the speed of traffic for safety, and everybody just plays ticket roulette together. Story 9. There's a tiny 3-unit strip mall in our neighborhood containing a Thai eatery, a pizza carryout, and a cannabis store. There's no driveway off of Winona Street to the west, and there is no break in the concrete median on Regent Avenue to get to the driveway there. If we're driving eastbound, every one of us locals briefly drives eastbound in the westbound lane to reach the driveway if there is no westbound traffic. If there is, we drive onto Bond Street and make a U-turn. Occasionally, when I've had out-of-neighborhood passengers with me, they've had vocal WTF moments with it, while I maintain a cool silence. Story 10. I don't always come to a complete stop at a 4-way stop sign when there's nobody there and nobody coming. I just slow down to almost 0 and roll forward a bit to see better, then proceed if safe to do so. I try to be a boring and predictable driver that nobody has an issue with. Last time I honked at someone because he didn't move at an advanced green, he flipped me off, turned left, stopped, I turned left, he followed me, would speed up and go in front and cut me off, then slow down and tailgate me. Every time he passed me, he'd yell something. I decided it was best to not stop or use signals until he messed off, or drive my regular route home. I exited the highway last second and he lost me. There was no other traffic. The closest police station was 20 minutes away. I don't have my phone accessible while driving due to our strict laws. Story 11. I worked for a Meals on Wheels delivering food to the less fortunate. I found out that #1. Most of these people were living in very nice houses and just knew the right people. 2. They destroyed any leftover food because they didn't want critters getting in the dumpsters. I found out that by critters, they meant homeless. These were church people and just wanted to look good on the community. I used to hide the leftovers on my route, go back and get it later and actually give it to homeless people or people that I knew struggled financially. I was fired for that, but screw those people. No regrets. Story 12. Falsify records so that the completely safe and wholesome food that we make can be given to employees making $14 instead of having those employees unwrap that food, spray it with blue foam, and throw it in the dumpster per our safety plan. There is no reason that a trial run of 500 meals that I can trace safely from their beginning to the freezer should be thrown away when there are 100 employees who like them and are happy to bring home a dinner for their family. I do regulatory control for a food manufacturer. I'm hardcore about document transparency in all aspects of food safety except stuff like this. It feels immoral to throw away all of that safe food. The falsification I do is only to retroactively classify it as experimental instead of sample. The CEO knows I do this and approves. Story 13. I bought a crap truck with 4 wood to use for the harsh North Dakota winter. It gets like $10, so I don't really drive it in the summer. It's been parked in the same spot for like 3 weeks. Technically illegal after 48 hours, but nobody here cares. Every month or so I move it, but that's about it. No tickets, no towing. In winter it becomes the daily driver and the car goes in its place because I need the heated garage to reliably start the post when it's 30 below. Then I'm breaking the same law, but with the car. I do move if there's a storm and need to plow. I just put it in the driveway. Just a hassle to move it back and forth, but I have to. I also accidentally emailed an ITR print to a supplier. It wasn't the first time. Jaywalking. Noise violations that I got away with for years in my younger days. Going into other people's mailboxes, but only because I received their mail. Obviously speeding. I used to violate the no smoking in bars laws when I was a musician because nobody cared. I've fished without a license many times. Lock me up, Your Honor. Story 14. I've been getting all my music free since 2010 with YouTube to 3 sites. I still can't believe people actually waste money on a monthly subscription for music. Yeah, the quality technically isn't as good off YouTube, but I can't even tell the difference with decent $70 headphones. Maybe if I had super expensive audiophile headphones, but my stuff still sounds good, so it. Even on my computer with a high-quality Klipsch sound system, I can barely even tell the difference between YouTube vs Spotify. It's not even noticeable unless I'm really trying to listen for it. Besides, I grew up having to play music on kit players with crappy speakers or headphones lol. So as far as I'm concerned, the quality I'm getting is amazing compared to those. Story 15. I was in a weird situation in college where I had to boost my GPA to above 3.0 to officially get into my desired department. And my options were either to retake a higher level class and get a better grade, or take a class I exempted with high school credit to get a B or higher and actually have it count as a letter grade. I ended up taking Calc 1, knowing it would be an absolute cakewalk. Well, we were told that homework was going to be 10% of our grade, meaning that without doing any of it, our grade was capped at 90%. The homework was from a code in the book, but the book was $350. The thing was, I knew Calc 1 like the back of my hand, especially since I was taking differential equations at the same time lol, and refused to spend $350 on a textbook. So I said fuck it, challenge accepted. Anyway, I had to essentially 100% every single exam in that class from beginning to end to compensate for that 10%, and the fact that my grade in the class was capped at A because of it. I managed it easily, but fuck those textbook scams. What methods do you have for coping with anxiety? Story 1. Cognitive restructuring, my favorite being looking for evidence of my worries/thoughts being unlikely, incoherent, or incorrect. For example, my friends probably hate me. What evidence do I have that could prove this? What evidence do I have to prove that they in fact do not? For me, it is more about my reaction to a situation. For instance, I dropped a cake I just made. Being upset is totally valid. Is the intensity of that emotion justified? I freeze and decide what level of upset makes sense. A hearty crap is justified. Screaming and throwing cake at the walls is not. If the rest of the day was super, crying might even be awk. It's taken years of practice, but I feel like most of my reactions are more reasonable now. Apparently, I look rather comical when I do this sometimes, because depending on what it is, I actually freeze. I stared at that cake for a hot minute before I reacted. Story 2. Journaling has been a game changer for me. It's like having a low-budget therapist who's available 24/7. I write down everything that's bugging me, and somehow seeing it on paper makes it seem more manageable. Plus, doodling in the margins is a nice bonus stress reliever. I've always found this difficult because I'm a fairly self-conscious person, so immortalizing my thoughts and feelings is tough. But maybe it would help. I'll give it a try. A lot of people swear by this. However, I've noticed that sometimes my anxiety gets only worse when I write down what's bothering me. It somehow becomes even more real, and I get consumed by the emotion. Story 3. When I'm sitting in the moment of anxiety, I do this. I breathe. A deep, long inhale. A comfortable, collapsing exhale. I focus on my breathing and my working lungs, and not on whatever problem has triggered my anxiety. Once I feel calmer, I look at the problem that's causing the anxiety. I imagine the worst-case scenario. What if my deepest worry actually materialized? I then figure out what I would do if that actually happened. Once I realize that, even though it's not something I wish to go through, that there is a path out of it, I feel calmer and in more control. I think back to other times I felt this way, and the eventual outcome wasn't as difficult to deal with as I had imagined. For me, it's the loss of control and the unknown that causes my mental and emotional discomfort. Once I have an idea of a possible plan forward, it doesn't feel so scary. Hope this is of some help to you. Story 4. I literally just got off a plane and survived an oncoming anxiety attack. I'm a tall guy and I was stuck in the second to last row at the window. My window view was blocked by the engine and there were two bigger people next to me. I felt trapped and very confined and realized I have to be like this for like 2 hours. Short flight, thankfully. I did exact what you said above and held through. But man, I was going through it initially when we got seated. Story 5. Acutely or aggregately. Acutely. Try to focus on the present moment. Look around, take some deep breaths, and assess that nothing is currently wrong or disastrous, etc. in that moment. Additionally, it may be helpful to engage in something such as a hobby, a walk, etc. to distract yourself. Aggregately, and hear me when I say this. Do something that will fill your bucket daily, weekly, etc. Your bucket will fill 2 to 3% each day, and be emptied out 1 to 2% from life's stupidities. 6 months will go by and you'll be 30 to 40% better. 12 to 18 months will go by and you'll be 90% better. Just trust the process and take care of yourself and never give up. Story 6. This technique is called thought diffusion, and we practice this in the anxiety program I was in a bunch. My favorite method is labeling. So when a thought comes up saying that's a judging thought or that's an anxious thought, it seems silly, but it helps distance you from distressing thoughts your brain spits out. Other methods are repeating the thoughts you have in a silly voice or imagining leaves on a stream and putting your thoughts on the leaves as they float away. Naming your mind is another fave. I call mine Craig whenever I get any distressing thoughts. I used to struggle with self-harm, and now when my brain is like, you should go hurt yourself, I'll think, or we could not do that, Craig, you weirdo. Story 7. Depends on the type of anxiety, and my type of anxiety bingo card is about full, so I do lots of things. Health anxiety, square breathing, and not Googling stuff. Focusing on times I've gotten through periods of it before also helps. General anxiety, as hard as it is, distraction. Literally any task that might just stop me spiraling. Listening to happy music. Something I associate with having a good time or a happy memory. Combating it with positive thoughts, and also remembering that whatever I'm worrying about might not come to pass. I know it may sound cliche, but yoga has helped me with a lot of my anxiety too, and also discussing it and normalizing it. Often, when I was a child, I was shouted at for panicking, which just made it worse. Being kind to myself and accepting I have it has really improved how I cope with it. Story 8. One technique that I was taught, which I actually find to be quite good, is to ground yourself. Pick 5 things you can see, 5 things you can hear, 5 things you can touch, etc. The 5 can be any number, and is probably better a bit lower, because of lack of answers, but the concept is still the same. It's supposed to get your mind working in the right way when it's being flooded in the wrong way, and basically help you control the thought process. Story 9. When I had a very stressful job, I used this app called Calm. My sister, who also has a stressful job, got me a subscription. Not shilling for it by any measure, but it was useful. I go on break, find a quiet place, and listen to a meditation or stress-relieving bit. It was also good for sleep. I haven't used it since I left that job, and found out that it wasn't really about the stress of the job. It was that the job sucked. My current job can be far more stressful, but the company is a lot more supportive. Story 10. Control something you can control. Feel like life is slipping and you're overwhelmed? Pick one small thing you can control and do it. I usually start by cleaning my room till it sparkles. And I feel good because I accomplished something. Then I find something else I can control, maybe my exercise, and I go for a 2-mile walk to get some good air and see people going about life. Then I come home to a perfectly clean room. Next, I'll control what I'd eat. Maybe cook a healthy or cozy meal like some pancakes, eggs, sausage, and fruit, or some baked fish and veggies. After all that, I'm in a mood believing I can do whatever I want to, and whatever I need to. Just start small by controlling something you can control. Story 11. My best friend and I make a game out of it, coming up with the worst possible outcome and trying to exaggerate and make it worse in ridiculous ways, until eventually it becomes darkly funny. That simple technique has gotten me through so many rough patches and bad days. One of our recent ones. I'm going to go to this job interview and realize at the last second that my son threw up on my blouse and I didn't get the stain out. And then the person interviewing me is going to laugh and call everyone into point and look at me, and they'll all be standing in a circle around me, just calling me Puke Shirt and telling me I can't have the job. Then every time I try to go to another interview, word has already spread and they call me Puke Shirt there too. And eventually I can't get a job. My wife leaves me, I'm homeless, and none of the other homeless people want to sit with me, because no one wants to hang out with someone whose nickname is Puke Shirt. I really don't know why this helps with anxiety so much, but it does. My friend aced the interview and got the job. Story 12. Going out to get something I need helps me a lot when I am depressed. I tend not to leave the house, and not leaving the house makes me feel worse. But even just getting up and going to the grocery store or gas station helps me a lot. Once I was feeling awful. I was super low. I was stuck at home due to not being able to taste anything, never tested positive for COVID, no other symptoms, it was weird. But I had to quarantine anyways. My boyfriend wanted McDonald's, asked if I wanted to go. I wasn't hungry, but I still went. We did the drive-thru, so I didn't even have to get out of the car. But the act of going outside for a few seconds, getting in the car, and going somewhere else made me feel a ton better. I like doing the grocery store when I am depressed because it gets me out of the house. I do something I need to do, I have food at home to eat, and I feel a bit better. Story 13. I try to turn it into a resource. I've had violent anxiety for years, it's a curse, so at least I try to take advantage of it. Some of the ideas I wrote down during peak anxiety at 4 a.m. solved some problems I've been stuck on for weeks. It's like the brain works extra hard in these moments. When I can't come up with an actual idea, I write down a tiny step that goes towards reducing the source of my anxiety. They're not a solution, they just go in the direction of reducing the problem. For example, when my brain goes, "You messed up at work, you're so dumb," everyone will know how incompetent you are and you'll get fired. I give myself the task to complete a short online class, so I am more qualified in case I need to find a new job. Projecting myself in the future with a concrete task helps to calm down. And I've completed hundreds of those classes. Now recruiters think I'm passionate, all thanks to my anxiety. Hope it helps a little bit. Good luck. Story 14. This is so silly, but it's something that my therapist taught me. One way to better understand your anxiety so that you can manage it better for the next time is understanding the source. You can use the acronym NUTS. There are 4 major sources of anxiety: novelty, unpredictability, threat to the ego, and sense of control. Events triggering anxiety can hit one or more of the letters in the acronym. For me, when I am feeling anxious, it helps to analyze the situation and understand why I'm feeling anxious. Understanding it has proved to be a great tool for me to tackle it. Story 15. Beyond medication, distraction. Eventually, I'll find something that distracts me long enough to quell the anxiety. Also, while I do that, and in general, I'll do the touch on the thought and let it go thing my therapist taught me. Basically, whenever a negative/anxious thought enters your head, you acknowledge it and let it go. She had me practice visualizing the thought floating out of my brain, and I still do this. Sometimes I just tell myself not now and visualize it going back into the depths of my brain, but I'm sure she'd say that's not quite what she meant. I know exercising comes highly recommended, but I also know that's hard sometimes, at least for me. So I'll let the dog out and pace around the yard while I scroll my phone or something, distraction and light exercise. But I've also done it in my front yard/around my house. I do live in a more rural area and have a pretty open floor plan, though, so obviously that helps. For public calm strips on my phone and a few other places. What's a red flag everyone should be aware of when attending a job interview? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. I brought up a company's awful Glassdoor reviews and they got so mad they ended the interview. Well, guess I dodged that bullet. As soon as the interviewer asked if I had any questions, I asked why they were always advertising, admin job, and she yelled and said we are here to work, and we have people that don't want to work. Told her that had I known who I was mailing my resume to, I wouldn't have. It was a blind newspaper ad. Had my rejection postcard in the mail the next day. Story 2. If they tell you on arrival that the job you applied for is no longer available, but they have a very similar position that just opened up, leave immediately. It's a bait-and-switch tactic, coupled with the sunk cost fallacy. The new position will be identical to the original one you applied for, except the salary is significantly lower. They're hoping that you'll play along because you showed up to be interviewed, probably desperate for work, and will accept any job, no matter the wage. Furthermore, the position you applied for doesn't really exist, or at least not at the advertised wage. Story 3. I've been asked what university my father went to, he was a farmer, and what kind of house I lived in as a child. What kind of clubs my mother belonged to. The local women had some kind of handicraft get-together. Does that count? And a variety of other questions clearly meant to make sure they only hired people from higher social strata. I gave some crap answers, then left. I also had an interview at Microsoft a long time ago. They used to ask which of the 7 dwarfs was your favorite and why. I answered Grumpy. We have so much in common. Ask stupid questions, get stupid answers. Story 4. Had a job that tried to do that to me after all the paperwork was done. What they didn't realize of their own contract was any oat needed written approval. They kept getting mad that I would get up and walk away from employees at the help desk, desktop support, the second the clock struck 5 because I was contractually and legally obligated to stop working at the 8-hour mark, unless they gave me written consent to keep going. I let the employee know every time why I had to abandon their repair mid-work, and that unless my boss wrote permission, I had to go home. My boss was let go and my contract was renegotiated to a higher hourly rate with implied consent for OT. Story 5. If they lied about the salary on the posting. First time was in the 4th job interview, 4 office visits. I was confused why negotiations around stocks and PTO were going weirdly, and I finally asked if they were even willing to pay salary stated in the job ad. They were not, and I politely thanked them for their time and wished them good luck finding someone experienced and knowledgeable to meet their needs at that price point. Second time turned out to be someone pretending to hire for one company, but were really starting a competing business, and they were only willing to pay in equity, no salary. Third also only wanted to pay in equity, but didn't have a clear business plan, just some patents. I'm done interviewing at very early stage startups. Story 6. When you are signing all the forms they give you and you are taking your time to read over every document so that you can fully understand what you are getting into, and people come in and start telling you that you don't need to read this and that just sign here and so on. I've more than once left a job and they tell me about exit policies I'm supposed to know that were in the employee handbook. I explain I never received a copy of the handbook, and they smugly go look for the form they think I signed when I started, but on starting I always just tell them I can't sign a form saying I received the handbook if they haven't given it to me, and they just never bother giving it to me. HR always seems upset they can't catch me in some gotcha moment. Story 7. Employees are either new hires or have been there for more than 15 years with no in-between. There is no room for improvement. It's better to leave for advancement. That was almost exactly my scenario till 3 weeks ago. Started working at this company 6.5 years ago. It is a small company with less than 10 people. Works nice and relaxed. But the guy I'd worked with is a humorless sociopath. He had 10 more years there than me. My predecessors either didn't want the job full-time or had major issues with him. Also, the promise of improvement was never acted upon. Everyone was set in their roles and unwilling to relinquish some of their workload. I guess you learn bit by bit what to pay attention to. Story 8. One red flag for sure is when they talk about how the company is like a family. Like that usually means they expect you to be super available all the time and put the job above everything else, even your actual life. I avoid these now too. I worked for a place that was like a family, and they did have a lot of husband/wife and like aunt/niece type combos of employees. Everyone was super nice for the most part. But as a non-related employee, I never felt like I had much say. Sure, I can give me thoughts on the strategy to take, but I'm also not sitting across from C-level during Thanksgiving dinner like my peer I'm in disagreement with. It was just a weird feeling, like it didn't matter what I wanted. Anyway, I left after a year. Everyone was super nice and kind though. Story 9. Caginess about the salary. One job I got handed my predecessor's email, and they were openly talking about how I was underpaid because I was underpaid. They had £22,000 more in the budget than they'd paid me, and cheapskates me on that. I lasted 9 months and was furious. They messed me for no reason other than they could. Any job advert that says competitive salary, I contact them and say, I have a competitive CV. Shall we stop the nonsense now? In the UK, competitive salary or posting no salary at all is really common. I'm seeing more salaried posts, but it drives me mad, and I swear it's part of why our salaries are so behind cost of living. Competitive salary basically stands for as little as we can pay you without going to prison. Story 10. Nobody wants to work anymore. You're about to find out exactly why nobody wants to work for them. Seriously, every single job I've worked that said that during an interview was toxic and grossly underpaid. I recall watching some news segment on the supposed inability to find workers after COVID and how some were claiming it was the free money from the government. They interviewed someone just railing about how they couldn't get anyone to even interview. They were paying minimum wage. The interviewer came back a few weeks or months later, and the place had found employees without a problem, once they started to pay a reasonable wage. Turns out the real phrase is nobody wants to work a crap job for bad pay. Story 11. I interviewed with one of the big ticket networks. It's based in southern New England. The pre-screen call with the hiring manager went well, and our reviews about writing code, source control, and documentation were spot on, so I thought I'd give it a shot. When I arrived, they took my driver's license from me and told me they'd hold it while I was on site. Then they wanted to do a credit check while I was taking a series of grammar, basic intelligence, and JavaScript tests. I told them there's no way I was going to get my credit dinged with a hard credit check before an offer. The woman from HR just didn't get it. I made sure they stopped the credit check, collected my license, and walked out. I sat in the car for a minute, thinking about the very odd vibe of the place, how they treated me, and wondered about the culture of a place that would do these things. Since then, they've been outed for a whole bunch of issues, including, big surprise, HR ethics. Looking back, I never should have considered working in that place. I'm very happy where I work now. My boss is smart and flexible, and I'm doing good work, as opposed to screwing concert goers. Near miss. Story 12. No matter the position, even entry level, if you're an external candidate, ask them this: if your decision comes down to an internal hire versus an external hire, what would make one stand out over the other? If they say everyone gets asked the same questions, so it's an even playing field or something like that, you just found out there are internal candidates and external candidates are only there to statistically even it out. The job will very likely go to the internal candidate. Works nearly every time. Story 13. You show up and it's not what you were told to expect. It's probably nonsense. My example is an interview I went to years ago. I'd had several phone interviews and it seemed it was going well. They asked me if I could come in for an interview. The first flag was something in the appointment email that made me look up the address, and it was a hotel conference center. I asked if this was an office or what. They admitted they were doing interviews in a conference room because they were doing a lot of hearing and had managers and HR flying in from around the country. I arrived at a giant conference hall with hundreds of applicants for the position I interviewed for. We checked in, got numbers, and waited and waited. Then sat through several rounds of group interviews with panels of interviewers. I talked to a few people while we waited and found out we'd all been told it was another round of interviews for people that had good prospects for getting hired. It was not. It was a circus. A guy I talked to on the way out was near tears. He'd taken an unpaid day off and borrowed a car to drive there. He told his wife he was coming home with a great job. The whole thing was degrading and insulting. Story 14. I asked if the promotion ladder could be clearly defined / laid out, and what systems they had in place to develop existing talent. I was in the interview at a personal request due to a lack of experience in the department. I obviously struck a nerve. After a closed-door chat, management was adamant that this was a performance-based company and promotions were applied accordingly. They were apparently not hard up enough for experience. I was not invited to join the team. If a company cannot detail employee retention and development outside of money, I personally don't want to work there. Strangely, they were touting their new pet insurance benefit as a big selling point. This was for an aerospace company and not a small one. Story 15. I was very motivated to leave a hostile work environment and switch to another agency. After being offered a new job at a new agency, the interviewer / my potential future boss said she needed me to start at a date in about 1.5 weeks. I told her that I needed at least 2 weeks due to turnover at my agency. They didn't deserve it, but I didn't want problems leaving. My potential boss then said, if you want to work here, you'll start in 1.5 weeks. I told them I didn't want to work there, but I appreciated them trying to bring me on board. Oddly enough, I now work at that agency, albeit a different division, and I'm technically higher up the chain than the person who offered me the job, although we've never spoken or run into each other since I've worked there. What's the most important thing you learned from your first relationship? Story 1. Don't lower your standards or tolerate awful behavior just because you're horny / lonely. This is what I learned from my first girlfriend in HS to my second to last girlfriend in college. Most of them were selfish, treated me crappy. The more mature I got, the more I realized how true it is that you can't change someone, including yourself. It always stung though. I seemed to put everything I could to make it work, so much effort, but they would still flame out. I'm a slow learner, I guess. I would make the same mistake, trying to change us both. I thought I was doomed. Then I started dating my last girlfriend from college. Good communication, only minor disagreements over the past 22 years of our marriage. We both had our faults but accept each other for who we are. Story 2. You can like the person, they can like you back. You might even be in love. It doesn't mean things will work out or that you can be together. I had a wonderful girlfriend in university who was sweet, supportive, hilarious, and sexy. We broke up because we just wanted different things out of life after we graduated. Neither of us did anything wrong, but we couldn't stay together and both be happy. It's too bad, but it happens. I still think of her fondly and have no regrets about dating or breaking up. In hindsight, we were each what the other person needed at the time, and I think we both left the relationship better people than we started it. Story 3. Something similar inspired my original comment. I was with someone for a couple years. We both decided to go to grad school, and both agreed we had to choose the best situation for our careers. Unfortunately, it put us at a distance, and we couldn't make the distance work and ended things with some crying I love yous. If either of us weren't advancing our careers and could relocate, we'd be married by now. However, we can't expect either of us to give up those ambitions. Hopefully we cross paths again in the future, but we know we can't sit and wait. It sucks, but life goes on, and I regret nothing. Story 4. That never having any kind of disagreement isn't as good as it sounds. Back then I thought that it was just so amazing how we would never disagree on anything or argue in any way. But then I realized that it was just because he wouldn't communicate and would lie about a lot of things. I would go so far to say, if you never have any serious conflicts in your relationship will probably not last. Disagreeing on topics that are important to us is normal. And in a good relationship, you can talk about these topics in a civilized manner and find solutions that work for both sides. Not having any disagreements is just a friendly coexistence, but not a deep connection. Story 5. She told me about how everyone in her life had victimized her. Her parents abused her, so did all her exes. She was bullied in school, her boss was a psycho, etc. I thought, I'm going to be the one to break this cycle and finally treat her right, because I'm such a nice guy. That's not how that works. You do everything you can for them and try to show them that people can be kind and loving, but before long they start treating you terribly and accusing you of things you never said or did. Yet, somehow always spin it so that you're the crap and it's all your fault. Story 6. I still don't really think my exes in these situations are bad people or anything or deserved any of that. It's sad, but also their responsibility to constructively deal with the trauma from the past, as unfair as that is. When someone else is involved, it matters. Some people internalize that stuff so much they just can't see past it. Like, no matter how much you tell them you think they are gorgeous and cool, they can't see it. I still have this happen in relationships sometimes. Unfortunately, I've found girls like that can be very passionate at the start, which can put on early blinders. I never judge anyone by their past, but if they are unwilling to look past it with matching behavior, I just nip it in the bud real quickly and address it before I get too attached. Trust your gut if something doesn't feel right. Confront them with it honestly and respectfully, And if the response is clear, they aren't willing to have a productive relationship. Time to hang up the towel. Story 7. Sadly, that appearances can be deceiving and to look out for red flags. My first girlfriend kept me away from her best friend, who she was previously attached at the hip to. She told me her best friend didn't like me at all, and it caused a lot of friction. Turns out my girlfriend sensed that her bestie and I were a better fit and proceeded to steal her friend's entire personality, interests, and personal history. We dated for 3 or 4 months until I started to pick up on her compulsive lying, which went way beyond this particular tactic. 2 years later, I struck up a friendship with her now ex-best friend, and we ended up dating for about 4 years. It was a bit surreal. Story 8. I learned you need to discuss and resolve your deal breakers: children, drug and alcohol use, finances, monogamy, where and how you want to live, etc. Anything that will break you up if you feel opposite ways. For me, it was I didn't want children, and he did. We both thought the other would change, and we were wrong. It's hard realizing you have planned a life with someone only to have it taken away because of one very important thing. We could have saved ourselves a lot of time and heartbreak by resolving it right off the bat. Story 9. Not from the first, but multiple failed ones. Communication is key. Discuss everything. Check in constantly. Boundaries: communicate yours and respect theirs. Don't ignore or rationalize bad behavior. When someone shows you they are a crap, believe them. Mutual trust has to exist. If you are unsure of your partner, either fix your perspective, if not warranted, or walk away if they give you reasons to not trust them. Always be kind and put yourself in their shoes in an argument. Text less, spend more time together. Never fight over text. The most important relationship is the one you have with yourself. No one will make you happy if you are not happy with yourself. Story 10. Relationships shouldn't be all-consuming. My whole life was my first relationship, and it bit me in the ass. That relationship ending felt like the world was ending. That's not healthy. A relationship is a two-way street. You should improve each other. You shouldn't rely solely on each other for happiness, though. Your day does not need to completely revolve around them 100% of the time. My personality changed with that person. My interests changed when I was with that person. That's exhausting, and also I can't get those pieces of my old self back in the same way. It's taken a long time to find myself again. Story 11. Not all relationships are permanent. We had a good run. For a couple that met in high school, it was a well above average run, both in quality and in duration. We broke up once and only for like 2 weeks. But as time went on, we drifted apart. We grew up and became different people with different life goals. Eventually, we had the talk, and it was hard. Tears were shed. We tried discussing things we could do to fix it, but realized there was no fixing it. My life goals and her life goals were simply not compatible. We realized we were both holding onto a past image of who each other were then, not who we are now, nor who we wanted to be. Neither one of us did anything wrong. Life's path kept us together for a while, and it was good. We learned and grew, supported and cared for each other. But then our paths went different ways, and we parted in an amicable, if heartbreaking manner. And what I learned from that is that not all relationships are going to be permanent, nor should they be. Don't drag something out if it's not meant to be. And by that I don't mean if it's not a fairy tale meant to be to just let it go. But always try to look at your relationship objectively. Do you want to be with this person as they are now and where they are going in the future? Don't hold on to an idealized version of them from the past. That version of them is gone, as is that version of you. Story 12. Communicate your feelings. I used to just say yes because I didn't want to make my ex sad or mad at me for not wanting to do something. I felt like I lost a part of myself throughout that and just got sad. Just communicate what you want to do and what you don't. Honesty in this case is the best policy. This may vary from person to person, but I learned that there are definitely some characteristics and traits that I want in a partner. It's okay to want that. I ended up changing myself and my habits and just ended up compromising my happiness too much for the sake of them. I felt trapped, and now I know what to look for, or at least talk about with any partner and what I want. Some people like clingy people or people who are dependent on you. I learned that I like to do my own things apart from my ex. I'm an independent person, and maybe that's just what I need. If there's a hint of doubt or you're mad about something, just talk about it. Don't go knocking around the bush. Sorry if this sounded like a rant. Story 13. So many things. You can't fix crazy. No, you are not so special that you can heal or give a safe space to nurture it away. That crazy was there before you. It lived a life before you. It isn't going away because you want it to go away. Crazy people are attracted for a reason. We look at them and often see that they are not as mentally/emotionally restricted by the conditioning of society as we are. They'd often beat to their own tune and let their impulses roam free for better and worse. This is why the sex is usually phenomenal with crazy. And to some degree, we also desire that lack of inhibition. That is, until the consequences start coming in. Don't be in a relationship for someone's potential. Look at them for who they are today, right now, and ask yourself if you are okay with this 1, 5, 10 years in the future. Story 14. Don't stay because they threaten to kill themselves. It's a power play, and each time you succumb to it, it becomes harder to leave and increases the odds of them actually doing it next time. Don't cede away privacy or parts of your life to placate them. Sure, in a healthy relationship, sharing and opening up sensitive parts of your life is normal. What isn't normal is a partner asking to look through your phone every time jealousy hits them. What isn't normal is them requiring a check-in and talking on the phone for 15 to 30 minutes every hour, on the hour, every time you are apart. I could go on, but yeah, that first one messed me up for years. Story 15. Some overlap in humor is gold, maybe even essential. The day of disagreement will come. Work together to find a fair compromise. Always share your feelings, thoughts, and worries from your point of view. Never make accusations and don't generalize "you always do this," or "you never help me with that." It only cripples your potential as a couple. If you can't find solutions, seek help from family, friends, or do research. Don't get stuck in a bubble. Figure out each other's strengths and weaknesses and be honest if you can't handle something. Don't let your pride and insecurity get in your way to true love. Don't dig up old mistakes. If you can't forgive and forget, imagine yourself in their position. Painful backstab through the heart. Get rid of your childish behavior. Show interest in his/her life. Ask about details and let him/her know you sincerely care. Make space for quality time together. Don't risk living separate lives and losing what you worked for together. What sounds like pseudoscience, but actually isn't. Story 1. The illusory truth effect. People will believe something just because it is repeated, even when they know that what's being said is not true. It's definitely one of the more concerning aspects of the rise of AI bots, in my opinion. It's going to become easier and easier for bad actors to flood the internet with something and make it look like it's coming from different places, and AI-created images or videos adds an even scarier layer to it. The brain forms subconscious associations, whether we want it to or not, and there's certainly a psychological aspect to repeatedly seeing something that looks real regardless of whether you know it's fake or not. Story 2. My therapist pointed this out once, and it has scared me ever since. I was talking to her about how nervous I was that my in-laws, terrible people, say awful lies about me to my husband, and it made me uncomfortable despite both me and my husband knowing those things aren't true. I said something about how I wish I could just be more mature and brush it off, but it made me so nervous to know that dynamic was happening behind my back. That's when she explained the illusory truth effect to me, and it felt like a bunch of puzzle pieces fell into place. Told her be careful who you spend time around. This applies to interpersonal relationships, not just weird conspiracy nutjob crap on the internet lol. Story 3. When an amputee is experiencing phantom limb pains, massaging their stump, and then the space where the limb was actually does help reduce the pains, especially if the person is already on the maximum dosage of pain meds and can't have any more. Hearing the hands against the sheets where the limb would be tricks the brain into thinking that it's still there, so it stops the nerves from overfiring as much. There is a truly harrowing New Yorker article called The Itch by Atul Gawande that gets into phantom limb pain and how looking at a box of mirrors that basically makes it seem like your regular limb is in the place of the missing one actually decrease their pain. Patients had a sense that the phantom limb was still there but ballooned to an extremely large size, and it would shrink to normal once they went through the mirror box. General TOE on this article, it's actual nightmare fuel, but it's incredibly fascinating and deeply well written. Story 4. Trying to describe otoliths or otoconia, causing dizziness, quickly in layman's terms, sounds a lot like quackery. Especially when you start talking about the treatment being an all-natural set of exercises that will help you realign your inner crystals and regain balance. I had to go to a specialist, and when I told people I had to get my ear crystals realigned, it sounded made up. I literally didn't know ear crystals even existed until they told me mine were floating and needed adjusted. My husband's employee called it your wife's ear crystal voodoo. Story 5. Redheads need more anesthesia than non-redheads. Not sure if this fits the bill, but it's always been fascinating to me. In my medical chart it says paradoxical response to anesthesia, intolerant of twilight redheadedness. Waking up mid-surgery is not something anyone should experience. It's happened to me 3 times so far. I woke up during an upper gastrointestinal endoscopy. They had a hard time putting me out, and when I woke up in the middle of the procedure I forgot where I was and grabbed the nurse by her scrubs shirt. We were both scared lol. I also woke up and sat straight up on the way to the recovery room. I'd asked for that nurse and apologized to her. Fortunately, she was understanding about it. And I'm just a day walker, dark brown hair and red beard. Story 6. That talk about you changing personalities when switching languages apparently has truth to it. When I was living in Japan and friends/relatives would come visit me, they said I had 2 personalities depending on which language I was speaking. To the point that started calling me Japan Chris whenever I'd be using Japanese around them. They even said I would laugh differently when speaking Japanese compared to English. You tend to absorb culturalism when learning another language, particularly if you are around native speakers, so my body language, tone, and even my laugh would apparently switch between languages. Story 7. The effect on your dopamine receptors from fantasizing/imagining things. I forget the exact term. As it turns out, you can achieve a pretty high dopamine response from fantasizing/imagining/talking about goals, which can provide your brain with enough happy chemicals to actually hinder your drive to go and achieve those things for real. This sounds like nonsense, but it's true. Some people essentially self-medicate their depression this way. It is called maladaptive daydreaming. You basically use daydreaming like an addict uses heroin, giving yourself a dopamine rush by fantasizing having reached goals or making yourself a hero. It can even interfere with your ability to form relationships or complete daily tasks. Story 8. You absorb more nutrients from cooked eggs than you do from raw eggs. People don't believe it because cooking eggs actually does reduce the amount of nutrients. But cooking them changes the protein structures and makes it easier for your body to actually absorb them. It's called protein denaturation, and it increases the bioavailability of the proteins. Bioavailability describes what is actually available for your body to digest and absorb. More nutrients doesn't necessarily mean more bioavailability, and less nutrients doesn't necessarily mean less bioavailability. Also, cooked meat is easier to digest than raw meat. From what I've read, it's the same for cooked grains, vegetables, legumes, and tubers. Some nutrition is always lost via cooking, but the increased ease of digestion compensates for that. I believe the exception is fruits, especially citrus, where the raw value of vitamin C overshadows the cooked version. Story 9. Neuroplasticity is pretty crazy. Our brains rewire themselves to use new tools so we don't have to think as hard about using them. Picture writing your name and think about how your arm, hand, and fingers all move together to draw the letters. All that incredibly complex movement we don't even think about, our brains just do it. We can use tools like they're an appendage. Some people even learn to use new appendages or senses, like the third thumb thing from a while back, or the guy who plugged an antenna into his brain that lets him sense electromagnetic fields. Story 10. Mycelium. You're telling me the roots of mushrooms act as a big message delivery system that not only allows information to be sent large distances across a single specimen, but can also be used by connected trees to communicate with each other and swap nutrients? This is an oversimplification, and mycelium absolutely does not think, isn't sentient, like humans do. However, I'm not exaggerating just how implausible it all sounds. There are some amazing mushroom documentaries out there, and it still baffles me. Story 11. I've had surprisingly few people have an issue with it. I always expected a bit, because it does sound a bit mad. The one question that always comes up though is, why are they there in the first place / what are they supposed to do? People being way more familiar with what an accelerometer is now, given that they're in basically all phones, has made explaining that so much easier. The really messed up thing with treating BPV, even to me, is being able to tell exactly where the issue is, which side it is, which of the 3 semicircular canals the issue is in, and whether the otolith is free-flowing or is stuck, entirely based on which direction and how intensely the patient's eyes are flicking around when we're testing. Like, I get the mechanism behind why specific canals are linked to specific eye movements, but it's still messed up that I can be so specific in diagnosing which of these tiny structures in your inner ear is affected. But we struggle to accurately diagnose which of the major tendons in your shoulder that you've torn completely off. Story 12. I don't think this sounds like BS, but a lot of people have explained it to look like they doubt me. Phantom pain due to physical opioid addiction. Basically, if you actually injure your back and start taking opioids, your body learns that sending pain signals gets you to take opiates. Your body becomes physically or mentally dependent on the opiates, and so continues sending pain signals long after the injury has healed. I was in a car accident and had to take opiates to sleep because my back would hurt after lying down for more than 4 or 5 hours. I also didn't realize the doctor my lawyer had referred me to was more or less a pill mill. So when I kept going in and saying I was still in pain, she just kept writing scripts. This is also decades ago, when they were a lot more liberal with them. I tried cutting down to half as much and my back would wake up killing me worse than it had in months. It wasn't until I did some research on my own and found out about this that I was able to get off of them. You basically just have to tough it out for a week or two. It took 10 days and my back was angry, but I've never had pain like I did from the accident again. I was probably on pain pills for at least a year longer than I needed to be. With all of the talk of the opioid crisis, I can't believe this isn't discussed more. Story 13. The bacteria in your intestine exist to digest the foods you usually eat. If you stop eating those foods, the bacteria will die. So they send a message to your brain, causing you to crave those foods. If you're trying to give up French fries, for example, it will take about 4 weeks to kill all the bacteria accustomed to digesting that food, and you will continue to crave it while they live. It also may be possible to lose weight by getting a fecal transplant from a thin person. The only problem is, it is also possible to get a mental illness, potentially, from that same person, so they should be screened carefully. Story 14. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR. Essentially, you look at a moving light or object in the therapy room as you process painful memories, as in PTSD and related trauma disorders. It's very effective for most people, and typically works faster than traditional therapeutic models. Sometimes the relief is apparent even after one session. It's broadly applied to PTSD, anxiety disorders, phobia, dissociative disorders. EMDR is indicated for a wide variety of life challenges. Privately, I call it the little miracle. There are times when it appears to be almost mystical, but then the human mind is vast and endless, and we know very little about it. Story 15. Not exactly what the thread is asking about, but a story that just happened. My wife and I were watching some Netflix true crime show. Some guy is on the run from the police, and the police find a bag he stashed. All the electronics were wrapped in tinfoil. We laugh at it like, haha, tinfoil conspiracy nut. My wife asks, would that even do anything? I'm like, no. Well, I guess it might make a Faraday cage to block signals, but there's no way it does anything. Does it? I grabbed some tinfoil, wrapped my phone up, and yup, her phone calls were no longer coming through. So that's my answer. Wrapping your electronics in tinfoil sounds like pseudoscience, but it does stop them from wireless connections.
What's the worst thing people have tried to justify with, it was normal back then, everyone did it? Story 1. Doctors going on duty for more than 24 hours straight. A poor handoff can definitely be a source of errors, but practicing medicine while sleep-deprived is much more dangerous. Driving while sleep-deprived is just as dangerous as driving while under the influence, and we don't let doctors practice under the influence. I am definitely a much worse doctor on a 24-hour shift. Ultimately, this is an excuse that has been used by the medical system to exploit residents and justify not hiring enough people to reduce or eliminate 24-hour shifts. These shifts are also very damaging to the doctors themselves. Doctors often have to work several 24-hour shifts in a short time span, such as every other day or every third day. When you spend so much time working to care for others, you have no time to care for yourself. This leads to worsening mental and physical health, and ultimately contributes to worsening physician burnout, amongst many other things. Story 2. When I was starting out, our bosses abused us 10 times as badly as what you get pampered with. You don't know how good you got it. As an elder millennial, Xennial, I really have a lot of respect and hope for Gen Zers in this respect. We were treated like utter garbage by our employers and in our workplaces in the past, regardless of whatever work-life balance nonsense HR tried to market. Ultra-long hours, little vacation, workplace abuse, threats about sharing compensation info with a just suck it up party line. Screw that. When I hear a younger person in my job raise their hand, or better say no to subjugatory and oppressive policies and norms, I'm all right on sister brother. I really wish my general would have had the courage to do the same. Fight the power. Story 3. Beating children and spouses. Oh my god. There's always someone saying I was beat as a kid and I turned out fine. No, dude. You think beating kids is okay, so you clearly didn't turn out fine. When a child hits a child, we call it aggression. When a child hits an adult, we call it hostility. When an adult hits an adult, we call it assault. When an adult hits a child, we call it discipline. Haim Janot, child psychologist and psychotherapist. When an adult hits a child, we call it discipline. The worst about this is that it gives disciplining your children a bad rep. Should you discipline your children? You absolutely should if you want them to be functional adults one day. But disciplining means teaching them self-discipline. By example, by encouragement, by negotiation, by listening to their needs, and yes, sometimes by punishing them. But that has to be something like time out, until you are able to behave yourself again and not hitting them. Story 4. Drinking and driving. Every adult over 60 wants me to understand why those were the good old days. It was amazing how we survived our actions. Bit of humor. When breathalyzers were first introduced here in SW Australia, a workmate was pulled over on a Friday night as he was driving home. The police officer demanded that my workmate blow into the bag. Well, as he had participated in the normal Friday night ritual of getting pissed before going home, my mate refused. In fact, he told Copper that he would only blow in the bag if Copper went first. Yes. The road patrol police officer was just as drunk as my workmate. He got away with it. Story 5. Growing up in the 80s and 90s in rural Texas, I can say readily that causal racism in words and attitudes was extremely prevalent. Both of my brothers and I went to college, and then my older brother and I went to work for big businesses in various cities. My younger brother went back home to work for mom and dad with the intent of taking over their business. We had to have a real deep and thorough discussion as to why errant racist and bigoted words and jokes needed to be stopped. They didn't understand when we told them of the risk to their business. You never know when you are going to make a racist or anti-gay joke to a potential business customer, and that decision maker has a grandchild or child who is mixed or gay. They still wanted to say it was okay when I pointed out that it could cost them business and revenue in the small town, and that the world at large has changed in the last 35 years. Story 6. All forms of bullying. It looked cool from people in high school, according to my classmates. Now, some of my classmates were now gone due to bullying. It's not cool. Also bullied at work. Sounds like it wasn't nearly as bad as yours, but good God. I couldn't believe the mean girl crap that a bunch of 30 to 50-year-old women could get up to. I tend to be fueled by spite, so I managed to hold my ground until they got bored. It was eye-opening seeing how much they could get away with, though. Story 7. Definitely slavery, not just because it's a horrible thing to justify, but also because people try to justify it so often. One of the most popular lies in America is the lie that the so-called founding fathers can't be judged for owning slaves because that was accepted practice back then. In fact, the judge in the British Somerset case called slavery an odious institution in 1772, well before the US Constitution was written. The abolition movement was very much in full swing in the Anglosphere at the time. The Somerset ruling banned slavery in the British Isles in 1772. Canada banned slavery in 1793. And yet Americans persist in pretending that slavery was widely accepted with no concerns at the time of the country's founding. Just because they don't want to admit that the US founding fathers were bad people. They have their very own mythology, complete with heroes and villains, and they will not tolerate harsh criticism of those heroes. Story 8. I was at golf course, and a black man had been told in the pro shop that, as a single, they could let him join a group pretty quickly. 45 minutes passed, and he's still waiting. So he went to the desk and asked if they had an idea when he could play. The man left, and the pro said to the groundskeeper, "Who the F does that and think he is? They didn't see me standing there, and I laid into them." The groundskeeper then told me that back in the day, they used to call people from Poland a pejorative, and so what was the big deal? This was at an upscale course in Central Maryland. I wrote a letter to the owner of the course, who happened to be a Chinese man. He said he would handle it. I've never gone back. Story 9. My grandmother had a dog, a Rottweiler, when I was a child. She and my grandfather were completely unable to care for a dog, so they kept him for most of the day in a big cage, like XM, inside their land. As a result, the dog was not socialized enough and threatened to bite many people, including my sister and my father. After he attacked my grandfather, they decided to kill the dog by putting pieces of glass in his food so that the dog would die of internal bleeding. After I got to know this many years later, I tried to make the argument that that was insane and cruel, but the answer was that it was done like this in agrarian families in the past, and it was cheaper than going to the veterinary. My grandparents were super crazy. I'm happy I never had a lot to do with them. Story 10. Owning slaves. People have always known it was bad, especially when it comes to racial chattel slavery in the American South. It was seen as a necessary evil, and we don't really see any of the race science-based justifications made in any kind of concerted way until the antebellum period. Even as far back as ancient Rome, there were social mores against treating your domestic slaves poorly, and, in the later Republic and throughout the Empire, an expectation that the owner would free them after a period of time. This speaks to the fundamental understanding that all humans have always had, which is that keeping another human being in bondage is wrong. The most annoying thing, though, is when Americans pretend that the racial chattel slavery practiced in the American South was just like any other kind of slavery, which just shows they have no real understanding of the horrors of any kind of slavery. Story 11. My dad was in construction, and I'd hear a lot of stories from some of the older pros they used for subcontracting projects. The electrician stories were crazy. They used almost no protective gear and would just run their hand over a wire connection to see if it was hot, like WTF. They all have stories of being shocked, or watching a Keo worker get shocked, and kind of laugh about it like it's not a big deal. A guy got the tip of his finger cut off by a saw, and they just wrapped it in electrical tape and duct tape on the job site, and he went right back to work. Guy slipped on a shingle and fell off a first-floor roof. Nothing seemed broken, but he was in pain and probably had a concussion, so right back to work up the ladder to the roof again. Drinking on the job was kind of okay, like having a few beers at lunch. I think back then there was also more of a pride thing where if you got hurt in the job and wanted to go to the hospital or home, you got bullied like girl nicknames and were treated as weak for not sucking it up. Even now, the older ones kind of joke and bully when a younger guy gets hurt like, "Oh, Sally has a bruise." Story 12. When I was a sophomore in high school a few years ago, I had a panic attack on the first day of class with a new teacher. She wasn't in the room when me and my friend walked in from our previous class, so we just sat down since there were only a few people milling about the classroom. There was nothing on the board, and obviously no teacher, so me and my friend sat down next to each other and continued talking. Teacher comes in and yells at us asking why we aren't up front with everyone else. There was nothing telling us that. So we got up and stood with everyone else. The teacher decides to seat us boy, girl, boy, girl. I identified as a trans guy at the time, so I was already panicking about being misgendered. Then she states, there will be no listening to music, no talking, and we had to write everything in pen. It was an English class, and the first class I've ever experienced where I had to write solely in pen. I came home and talked to my mom about it, and how I was hyperventilating in class. My mom brushes it off, saying she grew up with teachers like that, and it was no big deal. The mental distress I was put in by that teacher and my mom brushing off my experiences that are new to me but are old to her is crazy. Story 13. I would like to draw on one from the near past, dragging women for choosing to be stay-at-home moms. I've been married for 20 years, and when my wife and I decided to have kids, we both figured it would be much easier to have my wife be the full-time caregiver. She harangued by so many people at the time. Must be nice, or are you just going to waste your potential? Things like that. Waste her potential for what? Being grist for the mill of capitalism? If I made enough money to support all of us without her having to work, why would we want to pay someone else to raise our kids? And to be clear, I would have happily been a stay-at-home dad, and she would have happily been the breadwinner. But the hand life dealt us gave me the fantastic job, and we have always worked as a team. Story 14. The problem is that we live in a different age, a different society, and a different world than even 5 years ago. We can't judge our parents' behavior based upon today's standards. Back in the 1950s, it was okay to build houses out of asbestos. In the 1890s, it was okay to put heroin and cocaine in cough suites. In the 1500s, it was a valid punishment to be impaled or flayed alive. It was the done thing, and as times change, we evolved into a better people. You cannot even foresee what will be a terrible act in the future. I mean, in 2010, nobody predicted that we would be called out for suggesting that a woman can have a penis. or that flat earthers would be given equal airtime on science programs in the name of fairness and equality. Story 15. That's such an interesting topic. It's always baffling how some people cling to the idea that just because something was deemed normal in the past, it somehow makes it acceptable. One of the worst things I've seen justified this way is the treatment of women and minorities throughout history. Just because certain discriminatory practices were widely accepted doesn't make them right. I also think about practices like smoking in public spaces or using lead in children's toys. Just because everyone did it doesn't mean it wasn't harmful. It's crucial to critically assess our history rather than justifying harmful behaviors as normal. It reminds us that societal standards can evolve, and just because something was once accepted doesn't mean it should be excused or repeated today. What are some examples that stand out to you? Men of Reddit. What do women just not get? Story 1. Sometimes I want to do nothing, and I'm not grumpy. I don't need to talk. I just want to sit here and do nothing for a bit. That's all I want when I get home, to sit down and blank out for like an hour. I've had to do tasks and interact with people all day. I just want to stare at the wall. But most importantly, I want everyone to shut up and leave me alone for a small period of time. Nope. That's apparently too much to ask. Instead, we're going to dump tasks and problems in my lap, complain about some petty interpersonal issue she had with someone today, and/or demand to have a serious talk about the placement of the couch or something that's not an immediate problem before I've even been able to take my boots off. LOL, just go away for an hour and I'll deal with it when I'm not a worn-out zombie anymore. Story 2. That I like intimacy too. I want to be hugged. I want to be complimented. And I don't want it to feel conditional because nearly everything in my life already is. Everything in my life feels so transactional. I just want some intimacy and compliments with no prompting or strings. Thanks for putting this so succinctly. I'm so tired of everything feeling conditional, transactional, etc., always feeling like I have to provide some sort of value to anyone I interact with, or else I won't matter to them. Often even when I do everything in my power for the day to be productive, healthy, successful, etc., I come home and feel invisible, worthless, like nothing is changing or matters. I just miss having someone to give me affection regardless of what I did or what I accomplished at the end of the day. Hurts even more when you look back at the times when you did think you had that, but even that was conditional on how much you benefited their life, and then you start to question if you'll ever receive genuine affection. Story 3. I am not angry. There is just nothing worth talking about at the moment. Also, on the flip side of me not being angry, yes, you are speaking way aggressively. It is called yelling. You are being overdramatic. No, I am not gaslighting you. I am speaking facts. No, I am not a narcissist. Yes, you just need to chill. Or is this just my experience because every guy I know says, oh, it's normal woman being woman? I have to explain that my mind is basically on one of 3 operating modes: hardcore survival multitasking, or an empty abyss. The third is hyperfixation mode. When I'm building a model or playing a video game, it's basically in one ear and out the other. Story 4. From my experience, thinking about nothing. Sometimes I like to just sit out on my deck in a nice chair, zone out, and have no thoughts. I would love to have the ability to have 0 thoughts. Unfortunately, my brain never shuts up. Editing to add, I have ADHD and OCD, so that's the main reason thinking about nothing can be so challenging for me. Unless you're neurospicy, you probably won't understand. I also want to say, all the comments from my fellow ADHD folks make me feel very seen and not so alone in this struggle. Story 5. I think people are pretty aware of it by this point. But the impact of a compliment, especially from a woman, goes a long way for men. I'm happily married and went to a bachelorette party for my brother-in-law and his bride-to-be. Everyone just partying and having a good time. I'm sober by choice and was just vibing as everyone drinks and smokes around me. As the sober one, I take care of things others don't remember to or are too drunk to. Making sure the food doesn't burn, cleaning the spills, whatever. And I'm happy to do it. Randomly, enjoying myself and playing some party games with everyone. A friend of the bride says only to me, "You're just a genuinely nice person. That's rare and great." I remember that 1-2-second interaction as clearly as my wedding day or graduating from college. Story 6. How damaging it is when we open up. be vulnerable to you, and you later use that against us when you are angry. I vented about work one day, and I get told that when I talk like this, she worries I am going to lose my job, how stressful that is, what that would do to our future, how long would it take me to find something new, etc. Okay. Got it. Don't complain about insignificant stressors at work. Then cut to, you never talk about your day, don't you want to talk with me? It's work. Nothing good ever happens. If I can't share about stressful stuff, then I can't talk. Story 7. That some of us can be total brick walls when it comes to getting hints. Look, unless you bluntly tell me what you want, I'm not going to catch on to it since I'm assuming it either doesn't have any meaning, or you are just joking. Does not count for all men, of course, but still. Add to that the danger of potentially misinterpreting a signal and end up looking like a total creep. So many times we go, no, she's just being friendly, because most of the time they are, so when she's not, well, do something more or else it will go to the same bag. More than that, one person's hints are another person just being friendly, and we're literally taught repeatedly to on the side of being friendly rather than flirting with me. Story 8. Having testicular cancer and non-stop hearing jokes and intrusive questions about having one ball, and it being normal. Imagine making jokes about a girl who had her breast removed from cancer, and your first thought is it's acceptable to make a "how's right?" or "did they have to cut your boob open and suck it out?" All things that were asked to me, without ever hearing, "Wow, that's horrible," or any sympathy, haha, edit. It was back in 2014 when I was 24. I'm all good and in remission for years, and the jokes are fine now and I make them all the time, haha. But when you are going through it, some nice words always help, lol. Story 9. We don't have anyone to talk to. When we have a bad day, we keep that crap to ourselves. We were taught not to burden our friends with our problems. And we know that odds are, if we communicate our frustrations of worries with a woman, there's a good chance it will fundamentally change the way she views us. And, or T used as ammunition, in a fight against us sometime in the future, so we just keep things to ourselves. That's why when you ask us what we are thinking about and we say nothing, we mean it. Since nobody cares about our crap, we just learn to bury it deep down and let our minds go as blank as possible. Story 10. That sometimes some random hobby, task, or goal can occupy 100% of my passion and thought, and that's okay. I am respectful enough to not make it detrimental, harmful to you in any way. But I want to invest 100% of my energy into that task for a moment, and not have to worry about you at all. Go take care of yourself for a bit, and let me nerd out on rebuilding our boat engines or whatever else I'm diving into for a few hours. The amount of when you're doing that you're not thinking about me can drive me nuts. I shouldn't have to always be thinking about you. You aren't that interesting to hold my lifetime of thought. Story 11. I'm going to add to the thinking about nothing topic a bit more. After a full day of work and dealing with all kinds of random drama, stress, and being on all day, the first thing I want to do when I sign off is just chill, wind down, and let my mind be perfectly content and not thinking about anything. This seems to be right about the same time my wife wants to come into the room and tell me about every single mundane detail that happened in her workday from start to finish. I have to fake interest in what Sally, who I've never met, said during a meeting, and what Joe, who I've never met, wrote in an email, or what the customer didn't do, or that Dave, who I've never met, had a birthday lunch, or that Lucy, who I've never met, put in her 2-week notice, or that they had a company-wide meeting to discuss a new policy. It is just exhausting. I'm trying to forget about my day, and all she wants to do is make me relive hers in its entirety. If I don't pretend to be interested, she gets mad at me. It's not that I don't care about her, it's just that I don't really need to hear about what happened at her job, unless it's something ridiculous, hilarious, or crazy out of the normal mundane activity. If any of you do this to your husband, please, for the love of God, stop. Story 12. No, I don't want to stop the movie every 30 seconds to explain what's going on to you. Yes, it's frustrating, because I just want to zone out and watch the movie. We're both watching this for the first time, so you know just as much as I do. I planned out 2 hours of my evening to zone out while watching this 100-minute long movie, and it ended up taking us 3 hours to watch it. Now that the movie is over, you ruined my watching experience. I wasn't able to zone out, and I'm frustrated. No, I don't want to now continue to talk to you afterwards. I just basically spent the last 3 hours talking to you. But if I make the tiniest noise from the other side of the house while you're watching that episode of Housewives for the 3rd time, suddenly I'm the crap. Story 13. Your words and approach matter. We want to feel special too. I saw a great video where a guy explained 2 different times he dated. The first one complained about his beard and scruff. It was too itchy and annoying. She complained about everything he wasn't doing. She continued to complain about things like this, and they broke up. The second woman let him know she thought his shaved face was sexy. She let him know that certain pants were sexy when he wore them, or that she loved when he did something. They got married. We want attention and loving too, and yes, the emotional connection is just as important. Flowers, or some small gift given with enthusiasm and gratitude, and mentioning the specific thing you're happy about, is great. The physical connection reinforces and assures us that the things we do and the emotional connection is real. I've done everything I can to assure you that you are beautiful to me, but because you can't see that, you eliminate the things that reinforce and make me feel good, complain about what I don't do, and then get upset when everything stops and you don't feel special. Story 14. It's not that I don't like talking, it's that I don't like talking for no reason. I need few words throughout the day, and most of those I use at work. I'm down with chatting about something interesting, but I'm okay just sitting in silence or watching TV. Uninterrupted. I get that you need to talk. That's what work and your friends are for. And foil, I'm not talking about serious stuff. I just mean the inane babble about the day. I don't need to hear about what little Jimmy said to Miss Crabapple today at lunch. I don't care about anyone in that story but the storyteller. So, if you want to tell me that anecdote, I get that there's a bit of a conversation tax I must pay in a relationship, but do me a favor and give me the Cliff's Notes version, please. Story 15. Yelling isn't violence. We yell when there is an emergency. We yell when something is urgent. We yell when we are in pain. We yell as indication that the current environment is critical. When a man is yelling, and he wants to leave, let him leave. Yelling, "Stop, give me space, you are acting crazy," is not abuse, and it is not violence. It's an urgent plea to de-escalate a critical situation. Women are being taught that being yelled at makes them a victim of abuse. Obviously, the words matter, and name-calling is abusive. But holy crap, this culture has made every incentive to claim a victim card like it's the most powerful Pokemon in the deck. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your those in the comment below.